Hello, and welcome to the YouTube channel of Open Doors Metropolitan Community Church in Seoul, Korea. We are a community seeking to live out the radically inclusive love of Jesus the Christ. We are a faith community of the Progressive Christian Alliance and an emerging church of metropolitan community churches. Please join us now for excerpts from the service held on Sunday, September 25th, 2016. This was the 19th Sunday after Pentecost, as well as the 4th Sunday in creation. The theme of the service is Where Do We Dwell? And the preacher is the Reverend Craig Bartlett.
The first reading is from the book of the prophet Jeremiah, reading from the first 3 verses and then verses 6 to 15. We are a multicultural, bilingual congregation. Therefore, would it be okay if you read the Korean version of that? Thank you. And we have the English version there so we can follow along.
유다왕 시드가 7기야 70년에 주님께서 예레미야에게 말씀하셨다. 그 해는 느부갓네 살 제18년이었다. 그때 예루살렘은 바빌로니아 왕의 군대에게 포위되어 있었고 예언자 예레미야는 유다 왕궁의 근위대에 뜰안에 갇혀 있었다. 유다 왕 시드기야는 예레미야를 그곳에 가두면서 그렇게 책망하였다. 주님께서 나에게 말씀하셨다. 너의 숙부 살룸의 아들 하나멜이 너에게 와서 아나돗에 있는 그 밭을 얻으러 사라고 하면서 그 밭을 유산으로 살 우선권이 너에게 있기 때문에 내가 그것을 사야 한다고 말할 것이다. 과연 주님이 말씀대로 숙부의 아들 하나멜이 그이대의 뜰 안으로 나를 찾아와서 내게 부탁하였다. 베냐민 지방의 아나돗에 있는 그 밭을 나더러 사라고 하였다. 그 밭을 소유할 권리도 나에게 있고 그 밭을 유산으로 사들일 권리도 나에게 있으니 그 밭을 사서 내 밭으로 삼으라고 하였다. 그때 나는 이것이 바로 주님의 명령을 깨달았다. 나는 숙부의 아들 하나멜에게서 아나돗에 있는 그 밭을 사고 값으로 그에게 은 17채겔을 팔아주었다. 그때 나는 매매 계약서에 서명을 하고 그것을 동의하고 증인들을 세우고 문을 저울에 달아주었다. 그리고 나는 법과 규례에 따라서 공인된 매매 계약서를 공인되지 않은 계약서와 함께 받았다. 그리고 나는 숙부의 아들 하나멜과 그 매매 계약서에 서명한 증인들과 공인된 뜰 안에 앉아있던 모든 유다 사람이 보는 앞에서 그 매매 계약서를 마세야의 손자이며 네리야의 아들인 바룩에게 넘겨주고 또한 그들이 모두 보는 앞에서 바룩에게 부탁하였다. 나 만군의 주 이스라엘의 하나님이 말한다. 이 증서들 곧 공인된 매매 계약서가 공인되지 않은 계약서를 받아서 공개의 그릇에 담아 여러 날 동안 보관하여라. 참으로 난 만군의 주 이스라엘의 하나님이 말한다. 사람들이 이 나라에서 가축과 밥과 포도원을 살 것이다.
The Gospel comes from the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 16, reading verses 19 to 31. Jesus tells the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen, who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who longed to satisfy his hunger with what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs would come and lick his sores. The poor man died and was carried away by the angels to be with Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was being tormented, he looked up and saw Abraham far away, with Lazarus by his side. He called out, "Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in agony in these flames." Abraham said, "Child, remember that during your lifetime you received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner evil things. But now he's comforted here, and you are in agony. Besides all this, between you and us a great chasm has been fixed, so that those who might want to pass from here to you cannot do so, and no one can cross from there to us." He said, "Then, Father, I beg you to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may warn them, so that they will not also come into this place of torment." Abraham replied, "They have Moses and the prophets. They should listen to them." He said, "No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent." He said to him, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead." Now, it's easy to ask the question, where do you live? We might think that the question, where do you dwell, has the same answer. However, in my study this week preparing for today, I discovered that the word dwell has a much deeper meaning than that. And it's actually related to the word tarry, which we just heard in the song in the garden. To tarry means to stay in a place for a long time. Therefore, the place where you dwell is the place where you tarry, the place where you spend a lot of time, considerable time. These days, we use the word dwell either in an old-fashioned way to talk about the place where we live, or we often use it to indicate when someone is fixated on some kind of thought or feeling or remembrance of an event, and it often has a negative connotation. How many times have you told somebody else, or how many times has someone told me, "Don't dwell on it"? So today, I'd like us to think about what our dwelling places are. It could be your home, or a particular room in your home, or if you're like most of us who are English teachers, the room which is your home. And due to that situation, it might just as well be in an office or a workspace or a study space. Or it might be in a coffee shop or some other place of meeting. I know in Britain, for some people, particularly in village life, their dwelling place, particularly in the evenings, was their neighborhood pub, which they would affectionately refer to as their local. Or it could be a place in nature, a place where you go to walk or to commune with nature, or just find some time to be with yourself, to read, to think about life, the universe, and everything. Now, these days, I'm an unemployed person. I finished my last job in the end of July, and I'm currently looking for a job, and to borrow the words of Steve Miller, it just gets getting tougher every day. So my dwelling place these days tends to be in front of my notebook computer in a desk in a corner of our living room in our apartment. And that's where I follow social media, that's where I prepare for what I'm doing here, where I play my Canadian Football League computer game. It's a strategy game, so it doesn't have any high graphics in that, so it doesn't get me riled up. or where I I scan the latest ads from Dave's ESL Cafe or ESL Rock or one of those other sites. For better or for worse, this is my dwelling place these days. So if we're thinking about dwelling places today, and what are the dwelling places we've heard about in our readings? Well, in the first reading, Jeremiah, whom I call the original performance artist, is engaged in another one of his symbolic actions, what scholars like to call sign acts. Now, if you read the book of Jeremiah one time through, and if you pay any attention to it, you'll find that the timeline is actually all over the place. There are parts which come from the early part of his ministry, other parts from the later part, and then right in the middle of it, he'll go back to another place in the past, which happened before the thing that he described. So the timeline's all over the place. However, the events that we heard about today in the first reading point to a time when Zedekiah was installed as a puppet king on the throne of Judah by the Egyptians, and Jeremiah was thus out of favor for his advice that Judah should submit to the encroaching Babylonian kingdom for its continued existence. In fact, he's reported earlier in the book to have sent a letter to those who are already exiled in Babylon, saying, "Build houses and vineyards. Let your children get married there. Engage in the same rituals of daily life as you did back home." You have one of his famous sayings: "Seek the welfare of the city in which you live, for in so doing you will ensure your welfare." However, in the midst of all this, while he's basically under palace arrest, under palace guard, he receives this message: exercise your right of inheritance, to buy a vineyard from your cousin. I don't know about you, but for me, it doesn't make a lot of sense to buy a vineyard, to buy property in a war zone. Because that's what Judah was. That's like trying to buy it's like trying to buy property in a place like Aleppo or Homs in Syria. If you watch YouTube regularly, there's or if you may have seen it on Facebook, there's a video going around showing the before and the after of various cities in Syria, before the civil war began and now that it's been raging on for 5 years. And it doesn't make for comfortable viewing. However, as with all of Jeremiah's sign acts, there's a point. And his message is, don't get too comfortable. Don't get too comfortable in Babylon now. That's where you are. That's where you live. But that's not going to be the place where you dwell, where your roots are going to be put down, where you will spend a long time. This sign act is ultimately a sign act of hope. It's a sign act saying that Judah will rise again. And if we think about the idea of where we dwell, I guess we could say it's addressed in a symbolic way. in Jesus' parable that we heard today. Now, the rich man dwells not only in his home, but he also dwells with his wealth. His sumptuous feasting indicates how attached he is to it. He can't get away from it. He can't let go of it. He clings to it. And meanwhile, you've got the poor man Lazarus, who basically relies on the mercy of dogs outside. Now, just a little point about that from Middle Eastern common folk knowledge of the time. We often, or at least when I grew up, I thought of the dogs coming to lick Lazarus' sores as being a source of torment. But that's not necessarily the case. These dogs were probably guard dogs that were put there by the rich man to keep intruders away. But it becomes a source of irony. The rich man can't see the poor guy outside at his gate, but his dogs, who are supposed to chase away and take a bite out of anyone who's intruding, they can see the man's need. And the licking of the swords actually is almost like a sense of comfort. There are some medieval interpreters who've said that the dogs are actually ministering to Lazarus. In a sense, as I read it these days, with that knowledge, it sort of adds to the irony of it all. And you also, another thing to remember, that in Jesus' day, people who might have heard this story probably thought, well, the rich guy obviously has God's blessing because he's so rich. What's Lazarus done in order to get God's curse? That was the prevailing view of the day. But the reversal of fortunes for these two men in the afterlife indicate what Jesus is proclaiming in the reign of God. It's a world where everything is turned upside down, where the poor are the ones who end up on top, and the wealthy are the ones on the bottom. I was thinking about it the other day. I had a classmate when I was doing my Master of Divinity studies, and her name is Linnea Good, and she went on to do quite a bit of contemporary hymn writing and songwriting, did a lot of stuff for kids. She's got albums galore, and you can buy them online. And I remember one of her songs was Turn the World Upside Down. And it was turned into a kiddies thing. Turn the world upside down. So that kind of thing. I wouldn't sing and I wouldn't shout if my eyes were inside out. Because if my eyes were inside out, I could see my heart outgrowing. Something like that. Well, it's all very nice and good. But turning the world upside down, it's not really a cute thing. In Jesus' day, it was a call to revolution. It was saying the order of things that we have now is not the way that it's meant to be, and if God were in charge, things would be a lot different. Another thing I find interesting, and it's from our translation here. I tend to use the New Revised Standard Version, and it's very interesting that the NRSV takes out that phrase, the bosom of Abraham. If you go back in the text, it says, the poor man was died and carried away by the angels to be with Abraham. But in the original Greek text, the word bosom is there. Some of you may already, and some of you may know the old song that goes, "Rock my soul in the bosom of Abraham, rock my soul in the bosom of Abraham." You don't know that one? Oh gosh! See, this shows how localized certain traditions and certain singing traditions are, because that's one that I was very familiar with. But the most modern, academically reliable translation that we have these days takes it out. Why does the NRSV not want us dwelling on this image of intimacy? A very good question. Very good question. Well, the fact is that censoring is something that the church is very good at. Don't we all know it? Everyone sitting here knows that in one way or another. Caroline Lewis, a professor of preaching whose work I follow regularly, has written the following. The church is quite skilled at censorship. It censors what we clergy wear. It censors what we want to say, what we need to say. We pray for the possibility of prophetic preaching only to back down when we wonder if the pulpit really can be a place of truth. Rather than take risks, we preach safe sermons. Our translations censor words which might lead to inappropriate thoughts about God. I'm going to be saying more about that next week. Our church authorities censor claims of God's love for the poor, the marginalized, the oppressed, with busy work and paperwork that keeps from the real work of the kingdom of God. Our interpretations censor images for God by replacing intimacy with explanation. And so the bosom of Abraham simply becomes the afterlife, if you will. Or for Martin Luther, the bosom of Abraham was a way of talking about the Word of God. So we're taught to go away from we're told, don't dwell on these things. Don't dwell on, bosoms, bodies. Ugh. Go somewhere else. Go up to your heads. Like Sir Ken Robinson said in his famous TED Talk. We're all oriented that our lives, our thinking, our doing is all centered up in our heads, in our brains, and to one side. So as an antidote to that, let's remember the words of the saint of El Salvador, Oscar Romero. That world of the poor, we say, is the key to understanding the Christian faith. The poor are the ones who tell us what the world is and what service the church must offer to the world. Now, I don't want to get too much into being Captain Owen Hornblower here, but that has led us in this congregation to make some decisions about, some intentional decisions about how we share fellowship after the service. Usually what we've done in the past is we've all gotten together and we've gone to one of the local restaurants in this neighborhood or close by in Gangnidan or perhaps Nitewan. And we may end up doing that again sometime on a special occasion or something like that. However, many of you sitting here today are newcomers, so I can tell you, we can tell you, it happened in, I guess it started happening in Itaewon way back. It started happening when I was there. And we've seen it happen here in the Haebangchon and Gyeongnidan districts. Gyeongnidan district is just across the street there where the kimchi pots are, across from Yongsan military base. HBC Gyeongnidan, it has become more and more gentrified over the years. It's still a place where people go to find affordable housing, but I can tell you, if you want to go out in this place, it's getting progressively more and more expensive. And it's gotten to the point where we've decided that we're going to take some intentional action on this. So our lunch today is basically going to be sharing some pastries and some savory pastries and some juice, and if anyone wants to go get a coffee, they're free to do so. But we felt like it's been necessary to make a choice about where we dwell, or how we dwell, when we have our times of fellowship together. And those times are very important for us because, as you will quickly find out, and as I keep finding out, we're from all over the place. I find that most of the time, the people who are actually from Seoul, who are here on Sunday mornings, are in the minority. So, some thoughts today about where we dwell, where we spend our time, and how we spend our time. Because inevitably, those things, the places where we dwell, the ways in which we dwell, say something about us and about our values. So, as people of God, may we choose wisely the places and the manners in which we dwell. Amen.
We thank you for watching. We also invite you to participate in our life as a faith community in person. All are welcome to join us in our worship and our ministry. Age, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, ethnicity, ability, and economic status are not barriers to participation. This is what we mean when we say radically inclusive. We worship at 11 a.m. on Sunday mornings in the Haebangchon district in Seoul. For more information about us, our location, and our ministry activities, please check our website at www.opendooorskorea.org. We hope to see you soon.